Some people can name every player on a team instantly, every rivalry, every season. They scream at televisions, celebrate strangers like family, feel devastated after losses they never personally experienced. And then there are people who feel almost nothing. They can watch a championship game quietly or skip it entirely, not because they hate sports, but because they never emotionally attach themselves to it. And if you've ever felt disconnected from sports culture, you probably noticed something uncomfortable. People sometimes treat that difference like something is wrong with you. You don't watch sports? You don't support any team? How are you not interested? And after hearing that enough times, you start wondering why the disconnect exists at all. But the answer goes much deeper than preference. Because people who don't obsess over sports often experience identity differently. Think about it carefully. Sports are rarely just about the game itself. They're about belonging. A jersey becomes identity. A team becomes community. A victory becomes shared emotional meaning. For many people, sports create something emotionally comforting, a tribe, and humans naturally crave tribes. We want shared rituals, shared emotions, shared enemies, shared celebrations. Sports offer all of that instantly, especially in a world where real connection feels harder to find. That's why sports can become deeply emotional, not because people care about a ball moving, but because they care about what the ball represents emotionally. Connection, escape, identity, meaning. But people who don't obsess over sports often search for those feelings differently, sometimes through art, sometimes through music, sometimes through ideas, sometimes through solitude itself. Their emotional energy attaches somewhere else. Pause and reflect for a second. What actually makes you feel emotionally alive? Not entertained. Alive. That answer usually reveals more about someone than hobbies ever do. And here's something people rarely admit openly. Some emotionally sensitive people struggle with highly performative group energy. Crowds exhaust them. Loud emotional environments overwhelm them. Constant competitive energy drains them mentally. So while others feel energized during intense games, they quietly disconnect internally. Not out of arrogance, out of emotional wiring. Because emotionally observant people often process stimulation differently. They notice everything: the shouting, the aggression, the emotional swings, the social pressure to react correctly. And sometimes that becomes emotionally tiring instead of exciting, especially for overthinkers. Overthinkers rarely experience anything casually. Even simple social situations become mentally layered. They notice group psychology immediately, how emotions spread through crowds, how people mirror each other, how identity shifts inside groups. And once you notice that deeply, it becomes harder to lose yourself inside it fully. You start observing the experience instead of becoming consumed by it. That changes how sports feel emotionally. Because for many people, sports are partially about emotional surrender, letting yourself become fully absorbed. But emotionally analytical people often struggle to surrender completely. Their mind stays active, observing, questioning, analyzing, even during excitement. And here's another layer nobody talks about enough. Some people don't obsess over sports because competition itself feels emotionally exhausting. Not everyone enjoys constant winning and losing dynamics. Some people spent their entire childhood around pressure already. Pressure to succeed, pressure to compare, pressure to prove themselves. So when they enter adulthood, they unconsciously avoid environments built around emotional competition. Not because they're weak, because they're tired. That changes how certain personalities connect with sports culture. especially people who deeply value emotional peace. They often prefer experiences without winners or losers attached, conversations instead of rivalries, reflection instead of intensity, calmness instead of adrenaline. And honestly, modern culture sometimes struggles to understand people like that because society rewards passionate visibility. People admire loud enthusiasm, especially in groups. So when someone stays emotionally neutral about sports, others sometimes interpret that neutrality as emptiness. But neutrality is not always emptiness. Sometimes it's emotional independence. Pause for a moment. How many opinions do people adopt simply to feel included? Sports teams, politics, music tastes, internet trends. Humans fear social isolation deeply, so we naturally move toward collective identity. That's normal. But some people feel emotionally uncomfortable attaching themselves too strongly to group identities. Not because they think they're better than others, because they fear losing individuality inside collective emotion. And emotionally self-aware people notice that risk quickly, especially people who spent years trying to understand themselves privately. They protect their inner identity carefully. That's why some people feel strange pretending emotional investment they don't genuinely feel. Cheering artificially feels emotionally dishonest to them. So instead, they stay quiet, and that silence often gets misunderstood. But here's the deeper irony. Many people who don't obsess over sports still understand human psychology extremely well, sometimes better than the loudest fans, because observing from distance changes perspective. When you're outside intense emotional environments, you notice behaviors others miss completely. How victories temporarily unite strangers. How losses create emotional projection. How identity merges into symbols. It becomes fascinating psychologically, even if you never personally become obsessed yourself. And honestly, that doesn't make one person smarter than another. It simply means emotional fulfillment happens differently. Some people feel most alive screaming inside stadiums. Others feel most alive reading alone at midnight. Neither experience is automatically superior. But emotionally deep people often struggle when society treats only one type of passion as normal, especially men. A lot of men grow up learning sports equal masculinity. If you don't care about sports, people question your personality immediately, your confidence, your social skills, sometimes even your identity itself. And that pressure affects more people silently than anyone realizes. Because not everyone emotionally connects through competition. Some connect through creativity, some through empathy, some through curiosity, some through emotional depth itself. But quieter passions rarely receive the same social validation. That creates internal conflict, especially for people already questioning where they belong socially. So they learn to fake interest sometimes, just to avoid awkward conversations, just to feel included. And honestly, that can feel emotionally lonely. Pretending connection is still disconnection, even when surrounded by people. But there's another side worth understanding carefully. Some people avoid sports obsession because they become deeply aware of emotional escapism. Sports can absolutely create beautiful connection, but they can also become distraction, a way to temporarily escape personal dissatisfaction. Stress disappears during games. Loneliness fades briefly. Purpose suddenly feels shared. And emotionally reflective people notice that effect quickly, sometimes too quickly. They begin asking uncomfortable questions internally. Why does this matter so intensely? What feeling are people chasing here? What happens when the game ends? And once those questions appear, the emotional immersion changes. Because awareness changes participation. That doesn't ruin sports, but it changes how emotionally connected someone feels to them. And here's something surprisingly important. People who don't obsess over sports are often highly selective emotionally. They don't easily invest emotional energy without deep personal meaning attached. So if something feels externally inherited instead of internally meaningful, they struggle forcing emotional attachment to it. That pattern appears everywhere in life. Relationships, careers, beliefs, social expectations. Emotionally thoughtful people often resist automatic participation. They need emotional authenticity first, and sometimes that makes them feel disconnected from mainstream culture entirely. Because modern life constantly rewards visible enthusiasm. But not everyone experiences meaning loudly. Some people experience meaning quietly, internally, privately. And maybe that's the important distinction. Silence does not always mean absence of passion. Sometimes passion simply looks different. The quiet person skipping the game might still feel things intensely, just differently. Maybe they care more about human behavior than competition. Maybe they care more about conversations than scoreboards. Maybe they seek emotional depth instead of emotional stimulation. And maybe that's why they often feel misunderstood socially. Because people only recognize passion when it looks familiar. But human connection was never supposed to look identical. Pause and reflect for a second. What kinds of environments make you feel emotionally safe? Not socially accepted. Safe. That answer explains more than personality tests ever could. Because some nervous systems crave stimulation. Others crave calm. Some people recharge through crowds. Others recover through silence. Neither is wrong. There's simply different emotional orientations toward life. And once you understand that, you stop judging people so quickly for what excites them or what doesn't. You realize emotional fulfillment is deeply personal, not performative, not universal, personal. So if you've ever felt disconnected during sports conversations or awkward during emotionally intense fan culture, maybe you're not emotionless at all. Maybe your emotions simply attach themselves differently. Maybe your identity was never built around collective competition. Maybe you seek meaning more privately. Maybe your mind naturally observes before participating. And maybe that doesn't make you strange. Maybe it makes you emotionally self-aware. Because in a world constantly demanding louder reactions, there's something quietly powerful about understanding yourself deeply enough to know what genuinely moves you and what never truly did.